And we are live. I think we're about 2 seconds late, actually. Hi, everyone. It's the Enterprise Month in Review. We are going to roll. It's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. Uh, and I'm having a weird stream thing. Let me just try to get that out of my face. Sorry, folks. Tech fun.
Hmm.
Anyhow, Brian, hi. How you doing?
Doing fine, John. And apparently, I'm going to be seeing an awful lot of you in the next few weeks at different enterprise events. So
Yeah.
this one, at least, is just whatever.
Yeah, next time I ask you
Telephonic.
how, it'll be interesting to see if it's changed a lot after your repeated exposure to my presence. But anyhow, we are about to see each other on the road at several different points. Brian, we got a packed show today. If you're on LinkedIn, please chime in because this is a new LinkedIn stream this week, but it looks like it's going to be fine. If not, I can pop you a YouTube link in the chat if there's any issues. So just wave and say hi at some point if you hear this. And Brian, let's have a look at the infamous slide deck now. The month in review. How about going right into the agenda?
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be one of our shows unless it had a slide deck, an agenda, and some really stupid things that we'll cover in addition to the brilliant ones. So here's our agenda this month. We will
Yep.
have a cringy buzzword or whatever, and I'll share that with you guys in a moment. Each of us are going to cover our top three or so underrated enterprise stories of the month. These are the things that we think are important, but maybe didn't get quite all the headlines and didn't have the clickbait kind of nature to them, but they're still important. We've got a very special halftime guest, someone both John and I've known for a number of years. And we'll get into that in the middle of the show. We do have a whiff or two at the back end. And we'll ask the question, what inspires. But throughout it all, though, we genuinely want everyone's comments. And please flow them right into LinkedIn, Twitter, whatever you're using. And, we'll see them pop up here on our screen. We'd be happy to hear what you have to say. John?
Yes, indeed. And I am looking forward to finding out why ERP customers are in trouble with AI security. I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be our halftime special with Lewis. We're not quite there yet. So Brian, we got to stay in our game and get through our top underrated stories of the month. But first, this was funny. We had this buzzword that just didn't show up. And now what are we going to do, Brian? Are you going to give us one anyway?
The new word is called a fakerization. Fakersation. It's a fake conversation, is what it's short for. And it's how people are getting tricked into thinking they're having a one-on-one, like in a chat with a real human being, and only find out later on they got totally psyched out by an AI bot. Anyway, now we have a name for it, fakerization. I saw that in print, and I just thought I'd pass it on.
Yeah, there's a podcast about a guy who tried to live his entire life through a voice-related agent. I'll see if I can look up the name for later, but he faked a bunch of his friends and his mom. I think his mom too. Anyway, some of his friends were kind of hostile about that. But anyhow, that's a topic for another time because we are on to my top stories. So, Brian, sometimes you and I do some hand-wringing on the show about doing too much AI stuff and losing track of enterprise fundamentals. But we get back to that with another blog from Upper Edge, which is one of the blogs that takes the most unflinching look at enterprise implementation issues. This one is by Sam Bea. It's not a long blog, but man, it's a good one. And it hits on the uncomfortable reality of how implementation risk still ends careers. He talks about things like budget overruns, the quiet departure of capable leaders. Complexity has exploded. Delivery models have shifted risk. I think that's a really huge one and a really key one. Customers often lack leverage once delivery begins, right? So you lose it if you don't get it during the contract, and then you're trying to scramble later. Anyway, it's a real good problem statement around all of that, and then also some suggested solutions, including clear enforced accountability, early identification of risk signals, which is a really big one for me. You could have a long conversation about how to do that using today's tech. And then also independent oversight that has no delivery revenue at stake. I really like that one. Granted, some of this is in Upper Edge's self-interest, but since they only take money from customers and not vendors, I think they can get away with that in this case. So a very strong blog and not full of AI verbiage.
So what I really liked about this piece is there was a little bit of a compare and contrast going on in the copy where he talked about the way, let's say, ERP implementations took place, say, 10 to 20 years ago and beyond. And at those, you spent a lot of time up front doing a preliminary systems design where you baked in exactly what you want the new system to do. And then you marshaled the troops and the resources and you delivered exactly that. In contrast, in the more modern age, what's been going on is you kind of have a rough, squishy idea of what you want to do. And an implementer will give you a price for doing that, and then you get launched into a series, a never-ending cascade of change orders because you're using like agile kinds of development methods to build this stuff out. And you keep finding and changing things along the way. To me, that was the part of that whole story that really jumped out because it's true. What you used to do, I used to do in doing arrangements with clients was to spend that upfront time and really get it nailed down. And that way there would be no surprises. And to this day, that's still the way I approach work with clients. And I've I've only had one or two projects in my entire career where I had to give the client a change order. That's it. And you may think, well, boy, that must take a lot of time getting it nailed down the first time. And I go, it takes some effort, but still, I don't think it's fair to drop $1 million or whatever surprise on a client. And I know they're not going to give me a great reference if I do. And I could excuse it all away all day long with, well, but we had change orders. And that's what we subsequently agreed to. This article, I think, is an eye opener in exposing how things changed.
Yeah, and we could add to that these like longer term waterfall projects are increasingly rare and supplemented by a lot of much more shorter term things. A lot of AI projects are very iterative, and for customers to keep up, they really need a way to make course corrections much faster. And those course corrections need to be on their terms, not on the vendors. And that's where it gets tricky. And that's why I'm glad we see blog posts like that one.
Hmm.
If you are in the LinkedIn chat, can you just let me know that you're there and that it's working? Because I haven't had a chance to check yet. Uh, on we go to Vijay Sankar. If you look him up on LinkedIn, you'll see he has changed roles. And I noticed that when Vijay changed roles, he went to a new organization finally. Congrats. He also started blogging more, and that's cool. And this one is basically about the echo chamber in the executive suite with AI. And I really strongly recommend reading that because Vijay has seen a lot of AI projects at scale, both classic machine learning and also some generative and agentic. Anyway, there's some really good stuff here on, the contrast between hierarchies and flatter organizations. And Vijay talks about how AI might be able to help flatten those organizations, but that brings a whole new set of problems. And
And
here's a really good takeaway, Brian. Optimism about AI is one such topic in a large scale organization. Vijay says, what I hear from the very senior execs and what I hear from the less senior ones rarely matches. I think that's a really big takeaway.
that was an interesting dichotomy brought out. And again, it's not a super long piece. So it's quite munchable, if you will. And I think people ought to take a couple of good bites out of this piece and read it. By the way, I'll give a plug. VJ also wrote this article, which is what can we learn from bad managers? And I'll give him a plug for doing two great pieces in 1 month. So good job, VJ.
Yeah, Vijay, you hit on Brian's bad manager topic, and probably by the end of the show, Brian's going to have a vintage rant on that topic, I would expect. But none of us has blown a gasket yet, Brian, and we're 9 minutes in.
Okay.
This is really strange. Okay, next up, I have this one more. Oh yeah, welcome LinkedIn user. I'm not sure which LinkedIn user you are. LinkedIn is looking after you from a privacy standpoint on our screen. Uh, feel free to state your name. That would be helpful to me if you're comfortable with that. So this final one is a pretty notable study that came out across a number of different AI vendors on AI's so-called memorization crisis. This article was in the Atlantic writing about the study, and the gist of it is something that a lot of AI critics have been arguing for some time, which is that large language models are you can find ways of surfacing despite guardrails pretty large verbatim sections of copyrighted material of various kinds, and this has pretty big implications for a lot of the pending copyright lawsuits going on at the moment, and some that haven't yet been resolved. Now, I don't have a whole lot of faith in the court system to do what I consider to be the right thing around these lawsuits in a way that would really give these vendors pause at this point. But from an enterprise perspective, it's very, very important to be aware of how this stuff works in case you might be experimenting with models, particularly open source models, and just understand that there is potential copyright exposure involved that needs to be one of the risk management factors that you check off. And the way this piece closes at the very end kind of hits on that. Or let's see if I can see it before it fades out, because I think it took away my view. But basically, the reproduction of long excerpts of text creates a model that raises flags for anyone who's counting on being covered from a copyright angle, because a lot of fair use arguments require you to prove that you've transformed the content in some way, not putting it out verbatim. So just a heads up, it's a story to track and follow. And we have some new people in the chat. So let's just say, oh, missed you there. Tracy, hi, it's nice to see you. Arctic Cincinnati. Here we go. Happy New Year, Tracy. Good to see you. And Greg, yes, I thought it might be you. Greg, welcome to the show. All right, Brian, do you have a quick comment on the copyright thing?
Clearly a pain in my side for sure. And what bugs me is all the care and diligence I went through over the last several decades, making sure that when I wrote something and I quoted something, that I followed the tenets of fair use. Uh, and this stuff is just so over the top. I'm insulted that they call it a memorization crisis. It's a plagiarism crisis, is what it
Right.
is. And as someone who's written books and a whole bunch of other copyrighted materials, it still gets my blood boiling when someone just blatantly rips my stuff off and doesn't even give you attribution. I mean, that's like a double insult, right? For that. Um, so I do like the Atlantic. I like, the story does a good telling of what's going on, but I'm not happy at all with the answer because to me, it's a cop out, and there's no commitment, it seems, for companies to actually, the AI tools to actually do something radically different to prevent this from happening in the future.
The study is available free. It's linked from the article. The final sentence from the excerpt is of the study says, taken together, our work highlights that even with model and system level safeguards, extraction of in-copyright training data remains a risk for production LLMs. We will get to more of those risks in a few minutes with our guest, Brian. We're going to need to blast through your stories if that's okay.
That's fun.
Your top stories.
So I've got two of them in a row here that deal with email inboxes. And the first one is basically taking a view that there's a great opportunity for AI companies to mine all kinds of information that's buried in your inbox. Now, the alleged beneficial aspect of this is that it can do a better job of maybe organizing information, finding it for you, and everything else, and get you out of the um, search mode, trying to find that one email or put together a thread of some things across like a team maybe that you were collaborating on something with. And while that sounds good, and they're coming up with interesting kinds of dashboards and other things that will reprioritize the stuff in better ways than what we've had in the past. Again, sounds beneficial. What I don't like, though, is I'm very uncomfortable with somebody like Google, who has some amazing number, like 8 billion email addresses out there that people are using. And I thought that was amazing since there's only 9 billion people on the planet Earth. But I don't think they should be mining information and really trying to understand what else going on within your mailbox. It's one thing if they want to be the software tool that displays information. There could be another thing if they want to be the server farm that helps facilitate the movement of a message through a network, from a sender to a receiver. But to have that kind of value that they want to impart with the newer generation of email uh, scares the pants out of me from a security, privacy, and that kind of perspective. Maybe our guest speaker will want to opine on that.
Brian, I sometimes say that Google knows more about me than my mother. Um, my email inbox is part of the reason for that. This is also turning into an unsolicited plug for Proton Mail, a highly secure email system that does not do that. So there is such a thing as a personal security and privacy stack. If you look into journalists like 404 Media, they've written blog posts about how to set yourself up with a fully private stack, including private messaging with Signal and stuff like that. So if you want to go that route, there's a lot you can do. Whether that will be acceptable to your corporate employers is a whole different question, et cetera. All right, Brian, you got another email story for us, huh? You're not done yet?
Uh, and this is a different angle, but um, this one's more into the mechanics of what they're going to do here. We don't need to really spend the material amount of time on this one. But again, I think what bothers me on this one, the reason I added it is we're getting a lot of press coming up on this. We're getting people building a market for a more enhanced kind of email capability. And that makes me think that a lot of less sophisticated, less savvy people are going to just go ahead and accept these new capabilities and surrender all kinds of personal rights and privacy that they may not really want to, particularly if they really knew what the issues were. So I'm a big time believer with a lot of technologies that they just because a new technology can do something doesn't necessarily mean it should. And the same thing for people when it comes to adopting new technology. That's it.
I'm opting out of that shit. I can tell you that right now. Greg says if I pay for Google for email, I expect some privacy for sure. Sorry, Greg, that's not how it works. I wish it did. Basically, I would encourage you to shop around if prior privacy is a top concern for you. Okay, Brian, your last story, and then we got to get our guest in here.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of data on this one, but Mr. Lusher, who used to be, I believe, with Gartner years
Oh yeah,
ago,
Carter Lusher. Yeah, he issued this. Yep.
he's got a report out that came out yesterday that talked about additional Gartner layoffs. And you can read the paragraph here. It looks like one of the areas they're targeting is when they talk CEB, that's the Corporate Executive Board. Those are the folks who wrote probably one of the better books ever on technology sales. It was called The Challenger Sale, and they had an almost as
Yep.
equally successful book right behind it. Those two to me are still incredible benchmarks of sales, and they were so well researched. They're to me like some of the better standards for what a great business book ought to be like. So if they're gutting CEB and or some other kind of analysts and stuff, it tells me there are issues. Either AI is making a dent into their consulting business, which is a little bit different from the research and advisory side. But things are happening over there, and if it happens to Gartner, we're probably going to see that leaking over to Forrester and other groups as well. So it's something to watch.
One of my feelings there was one of the notes was like, look out for the talent being hired by smaller firms. And I would say yes and no. I'm not sure that all of that is true talent. I don't like anyone to lose their jobs. But, one of the reasons why analyst firms are getting disrupted right now is they didn't self disrupt nearly enough in earlier years, in my opinion. But that's a longer conversation. Tracy says, are those changes just for personal Gmail? We have Google Workspace. Tracy, your Google tech support specialist is currently hosting a show. so I won't be able to research that for you. But if anyone does know the answer, let me know. Otherwise, I will have to get back with you on that question. Generally, Google makes those changes across the board, but sometimes it gives a little more granular control to its paying customers, as alluded to by Greg. Brian, I think you have an infamous slide for Lewis, though. Unfortunately, I don't think you did the usual social media scrub for Lewis's most embarrassing picture. Oh, wait, you have one more story. Sorry.
I threw a fourth one in there. I really recommend if you care anything at all about HR or recruiting, you got to read this post on LinkedIn that Bill Beeman did. It's long, but he just categorically rips HR software a new one over the failing to understand how citizen AI tools, for one, are going to adversely impact HR and a whole bunch of other themes. I know I've probably talked on all of these points at some point in time, and he just put it together in one. I don't want to call it a rant or a screed. It's a eye-opening expose on what's wrong today with this technology because of the stimulus of AI in the space. Anyway, there's the link underneath it. It's picture. It's one to read.
Yeah, it was a good piece. I really liked it. At the end, I thought there was some agentic AI hype balloons thrown up in the air that I wasn't crazy about, but that's a whole nother thing. Anyway, we got to get ready for Lewis here.
Yeah.
We're behind, Brian.
So, Lewis, apologies. I found this picture from when you had John and I and PJ and others out at Fenway Park in Boston, and in May 2018, if my picture dating was correct.
Sure.
You haven't changed looks wise. Still, you still got the same hair, and for that alone, I'm envious. Same color too. And
I have an amazing wig man. I'm just kidding. I owe it to my Greek mom. My Greek mom had very thick black hair, and I inherited those genes. So I lucked out. On the gene lottery, I won on hair.
Well,
Meanwhile, I'm in the middle of the picture, and
right.
I am 3 times more gray. My hair is 10 times more long, and I'm on the plus side. I'm about 40 pounds lighter. So that's the deal there.
I have great memories of that event. I went into Steve Bazat's office. I was up in Paso Robles because I live in Orange, and I spent about a month up there when I first joined the company. I said, Steve, let's have our endless briefing at Fenway because, everything's so boring to go into a hotel and some nondescript hotel, and we're IQMS and we couldn't afford like a 5-star hotel. We couldn't throw it like in some Four Seasons down there. And he goes, yeah, I like it. It was the middle of summer. They were playing the Blue Jays. Great inter-rivalry. It was very, very successful. And it was so chill. I think, I think John could testify to that. I mean, sitting there for 4 hours and
it's fabulous.
We were not high pressure at all. And anybody who knows Steve Steve is a man of the people. He was a CMO at the time of IQMS, but don't let that title fool you because he can walk a shop floor with anybody and talk with anyone. And he's a phenomenal friend. And he's a great boss. What can I say? I've been blessed. Have him. He's a great friend too. Yeah.
I liked how in that picture, John's turned completely backwards to the screen. He's not even paying attention to what you guys were talking about. You ought to ask him to pay for, all that unused time. I have no idea what he was focused on. Well, that was the other reason I threw it in there because I could give John a good zinger on that.
Yeah, I bounced the idea off John. I go, John, what do you think? Should we do this? And John was like on board. And I said, well, is there a steakhouse around that we could take the people out for dinner afterwards? And John's like, yeah, there's this place down the street. Bam, it all just came together. And, it was probably the most enjoyable, I think, analyst briefings we've ever had. And we rented a big suite over there on the third base line at Fenway and gorgeous day. And of course, that was the year the Red Sox went all the way to the World Series. And they were playing like that day. It was a great game to be at because they absolutely just throttled the Blue Jays. It was
all right.
Really good.
I'm calling an end to the banter. Let's get back.
Okay.
but thanks for the awesome event in 2018.
Sure.
Tracy says I will check that one out. She's referring, Brian, to your last pick.
Right.
All the AI blasting of resumes. company posting, candidate applications, craziness, great
Yeah.
for third-party recruiters, though, indeed. Lewis,
Yeah.
before we get into your stuff, do you have a comment from what you had to endure backstage there? Anything interesting jump out for you?
Well, just a shout out to the Cincinnatian on the call. I worked at Syncom for a number of years after I left AMR, but prior to coming to IQMS, and there'll be a quiz at the end of this. And if you get a perfect score, I will send you a gift card to Skyline Chili because I love Skyline Chili.
It's
I
great
miss
to hear
Skyline
that.
Chili.
Oh,
Right down the street from Syncom. I used to go there for lunch and dinner all the time.
Lewis, hook Tracy up with some Skyline Chili.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Perfect
Tracy's
score,
super cool.
Skyline
That'd be
Chili
great.
on Lewis. That's right. Yeah.
Nice. Love it.
we just lost all the Texans on the call.
All right.
So
We actually do have a real bio here.
Oh,
Nice.
God. Yeah.
Brian, you want to do the honors?
well, I was just going to say, Lewis had a very interesting and colorful career. He spent a long time with a bunch of universities, good ones at that. And I think you at some point you did some time with Plex, not
Yeah.
just IQMS, and you were with one of the big analyst firms.
Right.
You've got the chops for today's conversation, and I think you only have one photo because I keep finding the same picture of you everywhere on the internet.
Yeah.
Anyway, enough of that.
It's hard to it's hard to get Lewis in trouble socially because his headshot's just the same everywhere. So
That was a Syncom headshot right there. That was taken right
Yeah.
down there on 55 Merchant Syncom. Yep.
So just real quick, I want to just explain one thing to our audience, which is you may be wondering how you get on our show. And the answer is not that you're friends with us. The answer is that you put out stuff that is really worthwhile and important to amplify. And Lewis, frankly, has been killing it over on VentureBeat, pertaining mostly to enterprise security related topics, though Lewis, as we've alluded to, has very deep background in things like manufacturing ERP. And it's the connections between the two that really interest me the most. So, Lewis, before this event, you said to me that ERP customers just aren't ready for the security challenges that AI poses. We're going to get into some of your articles a little bit, but can you just sort of say what prompted you to sort of toss that out to me?
Yeah, because I work with a lot of single instance ERP companies. I'm currently, in addition to writing for VentureBeat, I work with Dassault, and my job is to work with mid-tier manufacturers who've got IQMS system, now Delmia works, and I go visit them, and it tears your heart out to walk into a single instance ERP company. It's a mom and pop shop, and they've just been hit with ransomware, and to see the place come to a halt, and to meet these folks head on, and see what they're going through. And it's no knock on them. It's just that when you get really into the depths of how to make an ERP system run, for example, plastics manufacturing, I spent a lot of time with injection molders. I must visit with 4 or 5 a month. And I love that part of my job, to get on the shop floor. And I write about that a lot. What bothers me about security is sometimes it's an afterthought and it doesn't become a priority until they've been burned. And the building blocks for a manufacturer to get started with this is to realize that the old perimeter securities, like interdomain trust relationships on Windows Server. I mean, you walk in and people are actually running interdomain trust relationships, and this is like 2-decade-old technology, and that the perimeter is dead. So the perimeter is no longer a player. You've got to think about individualized protecting the identities of every person and protecting Active Directory, because that's what attackers want. And one story that really typifies this is a single instance manufacturer outside of Chicago. Won't disclose their name, but they got hit by an ransomware attack. And the attackers said, we want $2 million in ransom in Bitcoin. And the family responded back and said, we're not going to pay it. And we don't have that kind of money. And then they sent them their cyber insurance statement that they had actually been able to get off the main server by just being able to hack into their server, and said, by the way, you're covered up to 2 million, by the way. So, so this is the level of Yeah, that's true. That's from before clouds. Now, one thing you have to realize about manufacturers too is manufacturers stay on premise. The manufacturers are staying on premises, specifically in plastics and regulated industries, because by regulation, they need to be able to control every instance and every rollout of every version. So for compliance purposes, pharmaceutical manufacturers have to be on premise in a single instance or even in a multi-instance or a two-tier ERP configuration. But they do this for compliance because it's a lot easier than going to the cloud because you have to control every iteration of the software that comes out. So, when you go to these, small manufacturing companies, they have one centralized ERP system and they're trying to protect it through perimeter security and not zero trust and not being able to lock down every identity and every endpoint. And endpoints are critical because there was another manufacturer that I know of that their supplier was hacked, and that supplier had a link into the centralized processing system or centralized system. It's a procurement system into the main manufacturer. That small supplier got hacked, and then from that, the hacker was able to get into the main system. Now, that also played out with Maersk shipping, and you may not recall that, but a small supplier in Ukraine was hacked by a Russian activists. I think it was people debated whether it was nation state or not, but they hacked a small supplier in Ukraine and they took over the entire Maersk shipping framework or network just from that small supplier, and that emanates from not having strong endpoint security. And so I see.
Lewis, you froze up. He was in the middle of a really good point, too.
Attackers want to control Active Directory, and 9 times out of 10, that's where they're going.
Right.
And Brian's earlier point about Gmail and security, business email compromise is by far the quickest way in. Phishing attacks and with AI, phishing has become so ubiquitous, but also so tailored and multilingual. In the intersection of what I write about and what I see with manufacturing and the need for customers to move to the cloud. I mean, it's actually more secure to run in a hosted instance, run hosted managed services, or have security in there. Look at identity as the perimeter. Identities are the new perimeter,
Yep.
not the server. And I mean, if you know a manufacturer, you know a business that doesn't have endpoint security in place, or a firewall is not enough, because there are techniques now where multi-factor authentication can be overcome. And you really need to think about zero trust and endpoint security, especially through your supplier network. Yeah, I was going to say the other aspect of this is why zero trust is important is once an attacker gets in, the level of sophistication of attacks is off the charts. There's something called a living off the land attack, and that's where prompt injections come in and synthetic identities, and they're the hardest things to stop. And a living off the land attack is where an attacker will use common items and common tools and common code bases to be able to attack a company as well. And that's really hard to find out about until it's too late.
Right. And what you laid out, I think, makes a lot of sense. And your zero trust principles you've really detailed very well in your blog. And obviously, humans still create a lot of vulnerabilities. I almost blew a gasket on a show earlier today because there was a little too much hyping up of MCP for my taste, and it was referred to as a secure architecture. And I said, hang on a sec, like that's actually a pretty insecure agentic architecture unless you know what you're doing, which is the case, right, for a lot of these tools. And someone said to me, like, well, humans make mistakes too. And I said, well, it's not an either or. Humans make mistakes that expose your company, but you can exponentialize that with the improper use of these tools, because think about MCP servers having access to a wide range of functions within your enterprise. And Lewis, you add to that in a blog post right around the holidays that I think really crystallizes it when you wrote, OpenAI admits prompt injection is here to stay as enterprise lag on defenses. The point being that a very small percentage of companies have acted on these kinds of issues, and it's not going away, right? There's not a simple technical fix to these problems, and so that's a lot for manufacturers to absorb right now. But that's what you're writing about.
Right. And, I do spend a lot of time with manufacturing CEOs and owners. Uh, and I travel around quite a bit. And uh, they're not ready to take on that challenge yet. The vast majority want AI within the four walls of their business. They don't want anybody on ChatGPT. I've written a lot about making sure people don't get in uh, to make sure people don't get into ChatGPT and provide their data. The point is that uh, being able to deliver AI within the four walls of an enterprise and be able to keep that data secure, and even to air gap it. And to the comment, yeah, nothing is 100% secure, but a perimeterless business, a business that relies on perimeter, is a sitting duck. Now, IBM surveys have shown that manufacturing is the single most attacked industry. And for good, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's because security is an afterthought in manufacturing and an ERP system. I write a weekly newsletter internally on security and what's going on the latest in ERP. And I even have my own hype index I publish in my own newsletter around Dassault. And, SAP is really taking it on the chin right now with the outstanding CVEs they have. And that's because the North Koreans realized that they could break NetWeaver, and by breaking NetWeaver, they could get into some of the largest manufacturing companies and extract data, shut it down, practice geopolitical, provocative strategies and things like that. But it's a very, very aggressive space with adversarial AI right now. It's moving very fast, and so for manufacturers, I mean, the building blocks of zero trust are treat identity as a new perimeter. Simple things like if you have logins that you gave to contractors, you wouldn't believe how many companies have logins that are still on Dropbox, Salesforce, Okta, you name it, SAP logins that are a decade old and they're still active for anybody to get on there. So that's another on ramp that you see with a lot of manufacturers getting hit with attacks as well.
Brian.
So I think what's really interesting to me is the stakes have changed for companies as well as the technology that's hitting them. And I think it's the rationale of what these bad players out there in the market, what do they want? And in some cases, they don't want to hold you up for ransom. That's not their end state. That's not what they're looking for. They're looking to rape and pillage, a company's internal servers for all kinds of intellectual property, things they can sell on the black market, whatever, to other parties. You've got nation states who want to they want the IP, but they need hard currency. So they're looking for ways to get funds transferred out. They don't want to they want to be a parasite, but they don't want to kill the host. They want to siphon this stuff. Now you got the more amateurs groups, the smaller scale ones. They want to do like a CEO impersonation or whatever and get like some kind of one-shot wire transfer coming out of it. And I share your angst when you go around and visit some of these smaller manufacturers because the level of sophistication just isn't really there. When you think about, I like to use for illustrative purposes, I show a pie kind of chart that shows all the different things a role is responsible for, whether it's IT or HR or whatever. And what you realize is, okay, like in HR, they may have 16 things HR is responsible for. It doesn't matter the size of the company. They all got to do recruiting, payroll, benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And then you ask, how many HR people do you have at this like small manufacturer? And find out it's like 2.
Right.
And they go, there's no way they're doing all 16 of those things. Same problem happens in IT. The IT person at a small manufacturer, they're doing physical site security, like the alarm system for the building. They've got cell phones they have to manage. They do all the onboarding and offboarding and PCs and loading up the software. Their plate is beyond full. It's overloaded. And I think this personnel and time budgeting kind of constraint is part of the problem that they're not getting help with. And anything else gets added to their plate is something's going to fall off the table and not get addressed, which is what creates the environment that these bad actors are going to exploit.
That's exactly right. And the same thing with the CIO role, analogous to what you just said about the CHRO role and human resources. CIOs are like time splitting their time trying to do that. But you know what? One good thing that's happened with this en masse move to the cloud is that security is now being baked in there a lot more, and it's a lot easier to be able to enforce multi-factor authentication, even biometric authentication in the case of highly regulated industries that go to the cloud, and be able to bring a greater level of overall security, even in a hosted managed service environment, which is more of a hybrid type of environment, where you're still on a server, but it's a different model compared to cloud. But you're absolutely right, and it's interesting to see how this is progressing and how critical it is to get beyond thinking that it's only going to be that little wire coming in to your company. If you're a small small manufacturers, it's only, you think it's going to be that T1 line coming in or something like that. But I mean, under constant attack of different business email compromise, and once an attacker decides that they've picked out a target, they could scan ports. I mean, very sophisticated technology right now. And
what a lot of them are buying their IT hardware at Micro Center and Best Buy, whatever. They're not buying commercial stuff. They're buying home electronics materials. They're putting them in their small businesses, and they don't necessarily stand up the, if you will, the best kind of security that they ought to. Anyway,
True. I think starting with identity, get away from perimeter-based security and get into endpoint security and get that locked down. And my goodness, lock down Active Directory, because everybody wants Active Directory, because once you lock down Active Directory, you lock down a company. You lock down the identities, you pretty much own the company at that point. And then the other aspect of this is of course, education, but it's being able to understand who someone says they really are. And this gets into synthetic IDs, and I've written about this, about 11 attack vectors that bypass traditional security control. And synthetic identities are more and more happening across supply chains. And attackers know that, you disrupt a supply chain, it's like a ransomware multiplier. Especially, it's no accident that food and medical supply chains get hit the hardest because of the time urgency in manufacturing and the time value of what's going on in food as well as in medical and manufacturing supply chains. If an attacker knows they could do that, they can get like a 4.35 multiple on a ransomware type of a overall way that they look at that in terms of a payout. But it's interesting. I mean, at VentureBeat, we've interviewed some hackers that we promise not to dox them, but that it's more along the lines of like, these people are like red teamers that have joined the dark side, and they started out doing it out of curiosity, but curiously, money is not that big of an issue. It's this prowess of being able to break a system, and manufacturing systems are easy to break. And so that's why I think what's going on with SAP is going through its own epiphany right now about that in a big way on NetWeaver with all of its CVEs as well. They've got some serious work to do on security with their legacy because it wasn't baked in. It was almost like it was like their MCP of a decade ago or a generation ago.
Right. Hey, Louis, can I ask you something? Because I think this is important to your overall approach when you talk about the zero trust concepts. isn't one of the precepts of modern security to assume that you are going to get breached, and obviously you want to stop that if you can, but assume that you will, but you want to sort of have containment of that and limited damage through that breach, right? So isn't that a key component of the whole thing, is to make it so that even if you get inside, you can't essentially demolish everything you want and take everything you want?
Yeah, anybody interested in that, the NIST standard calls that out. And, the NIST standard, I think it's 812, which is the zero trust NIST standard, says assume you've already been breached. And that brings in segmentation and microsegmentation. And that's where you segment out your network, and and you have segmentation in place. And when CISOs roll out zero trust, they usually start with MFA and identity based security.
Lewis, I think we lost your last sentence there about the micro. Then they
Oh,
repeat that.
to assume that you've already been breached and someone's already in your network.
Right. Doxing is that another tool from the AI trolls.
No, doxing is actually revealing the identity of a hacker to the public, or revealing the identity of someone who's doing hacking and making their name public. That's doxing. Yeah.
So Lewis, you referenced the article on 11 runtime attacks that CISOs need to be aware of. I thought one of your key points there was why traditional security is failing at runtime. And then you wrote another really cool, relevant post to this discussion, which is 7 steps to AI supply chain visibility before a breach forces the issue. And you had some eye-opening stats. You talked about how 4 in 10 enterprise applications will feature task-specific AI agents this year. Yet research from Stanford indicates that a mere 6% of organizations have 6% have an advanced AI security strategy in place. And then you went on to say that Palo Alto Networks predicts 2026 will bring the first major lawsuits holding executives personally liable. I said personally liable for rogue AI actions. Many
Yeah.
organizations are grappling with how to contain the accelerating nature of these threats, and governance doesn't respond to quick fixes in this regard. But then you went on, and I think that was a really great wake up call, right? Because who wants to get personally held responsible for rogue AI activity? I
Sure.
can't think of a single CEO I've talked to in the last year who's had that on their wish list. But then you go on in the post and you talk about some of the visibility steps. So you've talked some about the solutions and how customers can respond, but what are some of the most valuable things that supply chain and manufacturing customers can do to start getting on top of this?
First of all, you're not going to stop uh, AI from being used. You're not going to stop ChatGPT and all of its flavors, Anthropic, uh, any of these. And I think you have to look at it from the perspective of how do you contain this threat, either at the browser level, uh, or do you contain it with a tool like I've written a lot about SentinelOne's acquisition of of their latest acquisition of a company that will stop this type of there's Nightfall Security, and there's a variety of other companies that do this. A lot of people are going to and then CrowdStrike just this week bought a company that will actually do this in the existing browser. So the CISOs I talk to, and there's one from Clearwater Analytics, which is like a $6 billion financial services firm. Um, and this is really an interesting story. And this guy, new to the job, ChatGPT just came out. He had to go in front of the board, and the board goes, "So how are we going to get in front of this? And don't tell us we're going to ban it, because we know shadow AI will just go through like a meteoric rise." And so he chose a enterprise browser that can actually sense this stuff and shut it down. That's one aspect. And then the other aspect is prompt security, does that as well. But you cannot legislate against this. I've written a lot about shadow AI, and we've done our own market roll-ups on market size of how pervasive shadow AI is. I've talked to partners at consulting firms that have built apps that have API calls in them and their shadow AI apps to get more work done because they're concerned about layoffs. Junior people that are about to become analysts or about to become partners. The fear is real in consulting about being replaced by AI. And I mean, we've ran the numbers and we've verified them with, corroborated them, but it's like an epidemic right now about people building AI apps, pirated AI or shadow AI apps complete with APIs. So that's one aspect of that. So what you tell a manufacturer is think about those elements. But then the other aspect of this is who really needs to get to AI? Who really needs to get on the internet anyway? And does it have to be that egalitarian? Know, and the CEOs that I talk to, again, I'm talking to, companies in the up to 500 million, maybe a couple at a billion level. But they want it all in their four walls, and they are calling for LLMs that are completely contained, their data being sovereign. It gets down to this very, very basic view of data being sovereign and not shared outside their four walls.
But Lewis,
So
I can't check my Reddit threads then.
I know, I know.
That's
So
that's rough,
they're,
man.
a lot of them are going through this, but the financial services firms, so they realize you've got to have internet access. They're jumping on internet enterprise browsers, and I'm going to be writing a feature about that next week about enterprise browsers and what's going on there, because there's just so much activity with the CISOs and security people that I talk to, and there's just so much vendor activity on it as well.
All right,
So
Brian, hold your thought real quick. For the chat, if you have a last question on security and ERP and supply chain for Lewis, please pop it in now because we're about to wrap this segment. And Brian, take us home.
well, this is a pretty wild thought. So I walked into one of these manufacturers, like Lewis has been describing, and things were kind of a little hinky with the way some of the people behaved and the way the systems work. And eventually, I traced the problem down to a department manager's PC who had unquestionably the most wired into pornography websites I've ever seen in my lifetime. And of course, with those came all kinds of other pieces of malware and spyware and everything else on there. To my astonishment, this guy tried to explain why that shouldn't be a problem and why did I remove it from his machines. And I'm like, you're talking about a gateway into things. And I guess where I'm going with this, Lewis, is
Yeah, where are you going with this? I'm wondering.
is that you could put in technical traps to stop this stuff. You can have gates at the front to stop it. You can tell people they can't get on, certain sites or use certain utilities, whatever. And they're human beings. They're going to find ways to work around it, get around it. They'll even disable the security on their own devices just so they can go do, to John's point, so he can go check his Reddits 6 times a day. So, for all the technology talk, I think we need to remember that a lot of this falls apart because there are human beings on both ends of these situations, and they don't always have the best of intentions or the best business savvy or security savvy to deal with. So the people can be a big piece of the problem. Anyway,
It's always, yeah. I mean, the MGM hack. The attackers knew more. The attackers had a better org chart than the people that worked there. That's how well, and they studied LinkedIn. And I spoke with someone who was involved in the reparation of MGM after that massive attack where they shut down the casino. And he said these attackers had spent about a year studying MGM as a target, knew everything. All they did was call the call center and ask for a reset, and then they were off. Then they were free. The other aspect about the gentleman is supposed to be building things rather than staring at that screen. Endpoint security software now is very affordable that will block actual sites. So there are manufacturers who now use endpoint security systems that are cloud-based that you can roll out pretty quickly across your entire domain. So if it's on the endpoint, it's not going anywhere. So one manufacturer put it out there, and they saw a sudden spark in everybody running in incognito mode and people trying to circumvent the endpoint agent. But this endpoint agent shut down a lot of that. It was gambling at this manufacturer, and so they put an endpoint security filter. And again, this is one of the tenets of zero trust. It treated every identity as a new security perimeter, every laptop, every login. We haven't talked about machine identities, but machine-based attacks are on the upswing, and I write about that a lot. And the last thing I wrote about was like 82-1 machine identities to human identities.
Yeah, Brian, there's no like cure-alls for these things, but like I was just listening to a podcast about Threat Locker, which basically like blocks everything by default, and you couldn't be on those rather adventurous websites because it wouldn't be whitelisted. So there's basically the security officers whitelist a handful of applications, and everything else, nothing else loads.
Yeah,
and and you just can't get into apps or websites that are not authorized. And that doesn't solve all your problems, of course, but that it does help. Of course, like Lewis and yourself were describing, you still have to keep your humans engaged as to why you're doing that so they don't get frustrated, because it starts to feel a little bit like a white collar prison where the solution can be worse to them anyway than the result, because they don't necessarily say, well, that's gonna bother me that much. I'm inconvenient. So anyway, there's a lot of sophistication to doing it right, but there are new tools, and that's encouraging as well.
Yeah.
I do want to correct one thing. I'm on Reddit not 6 times a day, more like 10. So just
That's an important correction to get on the record now.
Yeah.
Now I'm feeling better. I mean, personally, thank you for that. I'm feeling better.
Yeah. All right. Any last thing? Anything else for Lewis, Brian, before we head to our close?
Now, if we're going to stay on time, we're going to have to close her up.
Lewis, you're welcome to hang out for this. Just take a couple more minutes. We got a whiff of the month. Brian kicked all of mine to the curb in favor of this one. So, Brian, justify your whiff, man.
I thought with this whole idea, there was an article about Verizon's screw up this week. And people were posting all kinds of suggestions for Verizon on how to get their network back up. And I thought this one response was, to me, the bust out loud laughing moment, where one of the responders to Verizon said, why don't you turn your servers on and off again, as an attempt to fix the issue. And I just died laughing when I read that. Because every customer service call I ever make to some company, that's always the pat answer, is, well, turn the power off, unplug everything, wait a minute or two, and plug it back in.
Hi, Tammy. Have a great weekend. Thanks for listening in.
Thank you for listening. Yeah.
Tammy, I hope you're doing great. Tammy's a rock star out there doing community-based ERP work. I had some really good whiffs that Brian tabled, but I do want to mention there's a bunch of good worst in show stuff out there from the CES show, which was pretty much a disaster that would keep Lewis up late at night with all kinds of AI refrigerators, AI companions, AI doorbells, soulmates for your office. I can't think of any attack vectors in any of those areas, Lewis.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I have to tell you, I was in a briefing talking about that. I was in a briefing with a vendor working with the Department of Defense, and I was working on a story about that. And I'm not going to talk about which Department of Defense, but all the higher ups in this one branch of the government was really concerned because I found an endpoint on the scan of all of their IP addresses, and people were freaking out because this is on a ship. And they're like, there's an IP address that's a rogue IP address on this battleship.
Let me guess, it was a coffee maker or something.
It was an IP. Somebody had put an IP address on a toaster.
Yeah, there you go.
To know when the toast was done.
I kind of knew you were going this way because I had to have my refrigerator repaired about 8 months ago. It had never been worked on. And when this guy pulled this one panel away, I'll be damned, there was a USB jack down there near the floor. And I never knew it was there. And but it's not, thankfully, my refrigerator's not talking to anybody.
Lewis, can you imagine if some kind of military ship got commandeered because someone found a vulnerable attack vector in a friggin' smart
Toaster.
thermos or smart toaster or some crap.
And then they
Oh
just
my
branched.
God.
Yeah, and there was no segmentation of the network, so they just found their way up
Oh
into,
my
the
God.
command center.
Wow.
It was wild. They were
Well,
freaking out, but it was a great story that yeah,
that was my advice. Turn their phone off and back on, but it didn't work.
yeah.
Yeah, if only, if only. Anyhow, Lewis, you're killing it on this blog.
Oh, thank
Keep
you.
it up, man. It's
Appreciate it.
great stuff. There's not that many people writing as much original enterprise content as you are. So
Thank you.
keep up
I
the good
do it for
work.
the manufacturers I visit, my heart goes out to them. I do it for them, I really feel for them. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And something that inspires
Oh,
creates
yeah, it's
value.
about
Our
it.
final slide featuring Brian's dog. Brian, what inspires or creates value, man?
Well, it's going to be this book I'm writing, and I'm not going to say any more about it than that, but that's what's going to really inspire value. It's actually a positive focus kind of book for a change. So anyway, we'll see where that takes us. Anyhow,
Love to read it.
um,
Yeah.
and the other thing I would add, John, is again back tying to the beginning of our podcast. I can't believe how many vendor events I'm going to be at the next literally just a few weeks. So I don't know if it's going to inspire me or create a lot of value, all the posts that come out of that, but it should be an interesting time. I feel particularly armed and dangerous when it comes to arguing with vendor executives. So I'm ready. I'm absolutely ready. I've had some recharge time. I'm going to hit it.
Yeah, I hope some vendor executives went to look up the word acerbic from my profile that I put in there, because I'm feeling a little acerbic heading into these shows. But
I
you
thought you
know,
were trenchant. You were always the trenchant guy.
I'm falling from trenchant into acerbic. I mean, it's really it's getting concerning over here. But seriously though, um, like one of the best things about getting out there is intellectual curiosity, and I have my concerns and criticisms about a lot of things that are happening, but what really inspires me at these shows is seeing new stuff and different stuff. And granted, sometimes you have to dig for it. One of the things I've learned is if you really hit the show floor hard, you're going to see something that you hadn't seen before, and let's go do it, man. Let's go learn something. And next time you see us, hopefully we will have learned something. If not, that's an awful lot of wasted travel, Brian. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right.
Lewis
Thank you.
Columbus, Lewis, do you want to
Thank-
share anything that inspires you? You mentioned your manufacturers before. Is there anything else you want to close out on there?
I think tracking. I'm a big fan of reading out the system cards every time a new model comes out. Every time, let's say, Anthropic comes out with a new model. Of course, OpenAI is. I read their system cards and I look at what they're doing with red teaming, and I analyze those. And so you'll see me cover those pretty quickly when they come out. And Anthropic has got it going on with red teaming relative to OpenAI. I wrote about that about a month ago.
I saw that.
And
Yeah.
yeah, I went into great detail on it because it's fascinating to read those system cards. So I'm kind of geeking out on these models. Like everybody, I'm really fascinated with them, and I'm trying to build more and more agents. I've vibe coded like a product configuration tool at Dassault, and it's completely linked into the security of of the company. And I'm going to do my newsletter. I write the weekly newsletter, VentureBeat Security newsletter, and my lead story on the newsletter this coming week is going to be the top 10 lessons I learned about writing, vibe coding a corporate app securely. And so it's pretty eye opening. And
I think we might have lost you one more time there.
I think he's been
We held out.
picking fence to death now.
Yeah, I
thankfully,
think so. Lewis, I hope your vibe coding app never gets hacked, because that would get awkward and you'd have to write an awkward article. But congratulations,
yeah, yeah.
congratulations on all of that, and thanks for the excellent conversation. Thank you all for the chat for chiming in, and you will see us again in about a month's time. Catch you later.
Thank you.
See you, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.